Hi, this is Kylie Koo. Welcome to my studio. So, doing something just a little bit different today. I use tissue paper a lot in my work, both for doing gel plate work, but also in collage and other work of that sort. Now, one of the questions that has come up recently is which side should you put the paint or the other medium on? Is it the shiny side, which is this one? It's a little bit difficult to see on camera, or the sort of non-shiny side. Now, to be honest, I think when I've used it, I've not paid an awful lot of attention to it, but I thought that today I would do a few experiments with some different products, just seeing if one side is better than the other. Now, I use wet strength tissue paper, and it is an archival paper. Other than that, it's not terribly different from the normal gift shop tissue that you can buy, and probably some of the gift shop tissues you buy may well be archival as well. You would need to check that if that's something that concerns you. But this is wet strength, so it is slightly stronger. It's great for the gel plate because there's less chance of it tearing. It can tear, but less chance of it. So I'm going to do a number of things today. I will do some gel printing with it. Quite proud of myself because I've actually given my gel plates a very good clean, first time in ages. I'll use some slightly thicker paints. I'll use some kind of craft type paints. I'm going to try a metallic, and I've got some fluid acrylics, and I'm also going to try some modelling paste. I will also use some Derwent Inktense and some ink. I've just forgotten to lay that out. I'll use some acrylic ink as well. And I'll just do some on one side and then on the other, and then we will have a look and see if there is any material difference to that. So I'll probably switch to voiceover editing mode now, and I will just get on and get started. I'm going to start with this because this will take a little while to dry. I might put a little bit of an acrylic fluid into it just so you can see the colour. I'm going to use a couple of stencils from PM Artist Studio. I'll put links to these below. I'll let you know the names as I go along. And yeah, we'll see where it takes us. So I hope you enjoy this, just a bit of experimenting today. I've torn my paper down into smaller size sheets, and I'm writing on it the product that I'm using and whether it's S shiny or NS non-shiny side. I'm using this Pebeo modelling paste to start with. I like Pebeo products, but I'm not a big fan of this particular modelling paste. I'm going to mix in some quinacridone violet fluid acrylic by DecoArts, and I'm going to use a small bloom stencil by PM Artist Studio. It does come in different sizes. So I just start by taking a tiny amount of the fluid acrylic and mixing it into the modelling paste, and then all I'm going to do is to pull that through the stencil, one on the shiny side and the other on the non-shiny side. I'm applying it quite thinly. Modelling paste can take a little while to dry. This is quite early morning that I'm in the studio here, so it's cold, so it's going to take even longer to dry. So I'm just going to put it on quite thin at the moment, just in the hope that it will dry quite quickly. And I'm doing this first just to get it done so I can put it to the side and leave it for a while. So it actually turns out to be quite a nice colour for the blooms. And there we go, we'll put that off to the side. Now, because I've used modelling paste, I'm going to clean that stencil up quite quickly. Next, I'm going to take some Inktense pencils. First one is in tangerine and the second one in bark. I'd actually thought I'd pulled out black, but it's bark. Now, I did notice with the papers that when I'm doing this with the pencils, or indeed when I just write on them to say what product I'm using, there's a little bit of drag on the non-shiny side, but less so on the shiny. And I suppose that's maybe to be expected. So, you know, trying to make these as similar as possible using same amounts of water. And now these will go off to the side. Now I'm going to use some Liquitex Acrylic Ink, and this is in Muted Turquoise. It's a lovely colour. And again, I've got my shiny side and my non-shiny side, just taking it right out the dropper there and spreading that on. Now I will also take a little bit of water on a paintbrush and just down the bottom here, just spreading it with a little bit of water, just seeing if it reacts any differently this way. Next I'm taking quinacridone nickel azo gold, and again I'm just going to apply that direct to my pieces of paper. I'll be coming on to do gel printing shortly, but what I wanted to do initially was just to take the product as is and apply it to my little test sheets. Just taking a little bit of water in this. Go back to that first one, not sure if I applied a little bit more product to the second, but just spreading it out a little bit further with the little drop of water on my brush. Now I'll take this Pebeo acrylic, and I would liken this to a craft acrylic, and this is in a dark taupe colour. It's a colour that I really like, it's a paint I really like. And again, I'm just going to apply it direct to my sheets. Doesn't show up terribly well on here, but I was quite keen to see how it would show up, because as I say, this is one of the little craft paints that I really like. So again, there we go. And at this point, you know, there's no noticeable difference between them. I want to try a metallic as well, so I'm using this by Art Alchemy in Mermaid Teal colour. It's a beautiful colour. So same process, just going to apply a little to each. Now these are handy little experiments that I can keep, or you know, I will probably use all of these for collage at some point. Spreading it there and then putting it on a little bit thicker just to see if that makes a difference. I'm just going to flatten it down a little because again I want to get it dried as quickly as possible. Final product is this Daler Rowney Graduate Acrylic in black, so it's a bit thicker than the Pebeo paints, and again just want to see if the fact that it's thicker makes any difference on the non-shiny or the shiny side. And you know, really just making some marks on here, again just as a test, not looking to do anything more than a bit of mark making, but trying to do both the shiny and the non-shiny in much the same way. So I was going to use my little gel plate next, and I'd really cut my papers to that size for that purpose, but I've decided to use the big one. Now you can see here my plate is discoloured, it's got some little bits out of it. I've had this a very long time, but you know, it's still good enough. Taking the Quin Nickel Azo Gold, and I'm also going to use some of this Hobbycraft acrylic paint in turquoise. This is more, I would say, a craft paint. And I'm going to use this stencil, which is Lattice by PM Artist Studio, and again this comes in different sizes. So initially I'm going to put the fluid acrylic down. I'm going to spread that out, and I want to try a couple of different things with these, so just taking my time to make sure I brayer that out. I'm going to put my stencil on top. I'm then just taking a piece of printer paper, and I'm going to lift the colour from around the outsides of the stencil, but also I'm going to push into the little holes and lift some of that colour out as well. And you can see that on the sheet that I lifted. So lifting the stencil off now, and I'm just going to leave this to dry a little. I then come in with the turquoise, and I'm going to put a thinnish layer on top of the fluid acrylic. So the fluid acrylic is dry by now, and I'm just gently spreading this next layer over. Now it is actually still picking up a little bit of that colour, and you can see there the little indentations in the plate, but you know, that will affect the print, but I'm not worried about it. So I'm now going to take my two little test sheets, and again one is the shiny side and one is the non-shiny side. Just lifting any excess paint from around there and making sure that my tissue paper makes good contact with the plate. So I'm going to lift the tissue now and see what this looks like. Just doing it very gently, I don't want to tear it. As I say, it is stronger than normal tissue. And actually, although the quinacridone beneath is quite light, it does give it a kind of mermaid look, and I quite like the effect there. So moving on, I'm not going to clean the plate at all, but I'm now going to take some of the violet colour and I'm going to put that down, spread it out. Again, quite a thin coat. And I'm going to use that same stencil. I'm going to put it down. And this time I'm going to take 2 sheets of tissue and just put it directly on top. And just make sure that I lift some of the paint through and onto the tissue. Now my tissue I wasn't holding that tight enough, so it did move a little bit, but it was fine. I managed to position it so it wasn't too bad. So again, doing that with both sides. Taking that off, and I'm now going to use some Daler Rowney Payne's Grey Graduate Acrylic. Now this is quite a dark colour I'm using on top, but I am looking to create some colours for some other pieces of art that I'm working on, and I'm hoping that some of these might fit in with some of that. Now I'm usually pretty heavy-handed when I'm braiding, but I have been watching that's Patricia in PM Artist Studio, and noticing her kind of light touch when she's doing that. So I'm trying to, although I've been gel plating for years and years and years, there's still so much to learn at times, and seeing how others approach things is really helpful. So I've laid my tissue down. I've just put that piece of printer paper on top because I'm trying to get a really good bond between the tissue paper and the gel plate, and obviously the paint that's on it. So about to lift this off. As I say, I know it's going to be dark, but that's kind of what I'm looking for. A bit of resistance there, and I did, as I said at the start, I cleaned my gel plates, and I'm finding they are working so much better than they were before, because they were at the point where I could hardly lift anything. There was just so much debris on it. So I like those. Really pleased with the way they've turned out. Now, this is my second attempt at doing this because I was too impatient first time round and had a fail. I was going to leave it in, but the video was getting too long. So I'm taking that same metallic paint again, and I'm just going to spread it out through the Lattice stencil, trying not to get it too thick because again I'm conscious of how long it will take to dry, and you will see that I do actually use a heat tool just to try and encourage it to dry that little bit quicker. So just using a palette knife to scrape that through, trying to get it as even as possible without putting too much on. And I got a little bit smudging right in the middle there, but that's okay. So I'm going to leave that to dry for a little while and go and make myself a cup of coffee. Now what I do though is I take the stencil and I put it on those little bits that were fails from earlier, and it's all about just making marks, making collage. All of that will be used. So I'd made my coffee, and here I am just using the heat tool just to dry it. I'm going to use that top colour again from Pebeo. Just putting a little bit on each side because I want it to be kind of even, especially at the edges where I'm putting each of the papers. So spreading that out, again just going gently over this because I'm conscious that although the top of the paint might be dry, the metallic, it could still be slightly wet underneath. Wasn't quite enough, so I'm spreading a bit more on and doing it very gently and feeling there that I've got quite a good coverage. Okay, going to take my little trial sheets again, put those on, and I will put a piece across the middle just to pick up the good stuff in the middle there. So putting that on, I'm going to get a piece of printer paper, going to go over that, leaning quite heavily on it. Then I use the brayer as well, just wanting to make sure that I get good contact. Now, earlier, the bit I didn't show you, I didn't leave this long enough for it actually to be able to pick up the metallic. So what I'm going to do now is put this off to the side for a little while, just pressing it down a bit more, again just trying to make sure that I've got good contact there. So that will go off to the side, and then we will take a look at the other experiments. Now, some of these are still a little bit damp, so I do take the heat tool and run it over. You'll see that that there still had quite a blob of the ink. Of course, blowing tissue paper is not easy, it goes everywhere. The modelling paste was also a little bit damp. So I'm now just looking at both sides. That was the shiny side, just flipping it over to let you see it. That was the shiny side of the paper. Nothing lifting as far as I can see, so that all seems to be firmly down onto that piece of paper. Here's the non-shiny, and I managed to pick up a little bit of black from the paper behind, but never mind. And again, it's looking fine, it's not lifting, and I can't see any significant difference between the two. Now, this particular wet strength paper by Carnival isn't very shiny on the shiny side. You know, it's not terribly glossy, but there is a slight difference. This was the black paint, first on the shiny, then on the non-shiny, and again I can see no material difference. The metallic, a couple of times here I thought the shiny side was maybe just ever so slightly more vibrant, but honestly it would be very hard to say that for definite. So I'm trying to get it to catch the light there just to see if there's any difference, and on the back looking pretty much the same. I'd used a French spelling of metallic there that I'd lifted off the actual jar itself. So now to the acrylic ink, and this is where I did notice a little bit of difference. Now, I'd put a spare sheet of paper behind that just because it was going through a bit, but you'll see the side where I'd painted on the non-shiny, more of the ink has actually gone through that. So it's spread out quite far, even where I didn't use water on it, whereas on the shiny side I think it sat more on top of the paper, except where I'd used some water, and I did have to blow dry the blob that had been there out, so it's just kind of created a bit of drippage. So a slight difference with the acrylic ink. Here we are at the craft paints, and again, as far as I'm concerned, there is no significant difference between the two. So this was using the fluid acrylic first and then the Hobbycraft craft paint on top. I really do like the way that that's turned out, but again, no material difference. Again, this was the fluid acrylic with, I think it was a Payne's Grey on top. One slightly lighter than the other, but I think that was just due to the amount of paint on the plate. So really, I would say no significant difference there. This was a fluid acrylic, just painted directly on, and again I'd put an extra piece behind it just to take anything up, and basically the same. With the Inktense, perhaps a slight difference. It looked as if on the non-shiny side that it had spread a bit more, whereas not so much on the shiny side. But you know, that could be due partly down to the amount of water that I've used on it. So let's go back to the gel plate. So just taking a little sneak peek at the corner there, and I can see it is lifting the metallic, so I'm going to take that middle piece off first. I'm pulling it very slowly because I want as far as possible to lift the metallic plate, the metallic paint up from the plate. So I pull that off gently. I can already see that there's some being left there, but nevertheless I'm quite pleased with the way that that's turned out. So this one, first of all, is the non-shiny side. I keep referring to shiny and non-shiny. It's just my way of differentiating between the two. You could equally call it glossy and non-glossy. So pulling it very carefully, I can see some bits being left on the gel plate, but actually getting quite a nice amount up. And I don't mind it coming off like that because it gives it that kind of distressed look. So pleased with that. And now it's the shiny side. Just taking my time, pulling it from the edges first. I've not got this on at speed at all, this piece of it, so you know it does look very slow because I was going very slow. I've gone up to the other end, just pulling it from there now. I think this is the sort of thing, if you whipped it off like an elastoplast, like a band-aid, it would leave probably most of it still on the plate. But just by doing it slowly, it just seems to lift that little bit more. So comparing the two, both left some things on the plate. Maybe if I'd left it a bit longer, it might not have done that. It might have lifted more. Odd bits here and there. The non-shiny. There was a few more edges sticking up on that, but that could have simply been due to the way that I was pulling it up. Maybe I pulled this one up a little bit quicker. I think the shiny has lifted that little bit more, but again, it's so close, it would be very difficult to say that there was a material difference between the two. So the only one that I really thought there was a difference with was with the acrylic ink. All in all, I didn't find there to be much of a difference. Now, it could vary from tissue paper to tissue paper. You know, they're not all going to be the same. Some will probably be glossier on one side than these are. But this one I did see a bit of a difference. The acrylic ink seemed to sit more on top of the glossy side, the shiny side, when it didn't have water added, whereas on the non-shiny side it seemed to absorb more and spread out more, but that's the only one that I thought was different. So I hope you've found this useful, these experiments with tissue paper. I certainly enjoyed doing it. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up and please come back and join me again in future. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.